I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. As a member who's a tenant and a renter, I'm happy to take this call on this bill modernising the Residential Tenancies Act. This bill is better than the status quo, and that's why the Greens will be voting in support of this bill tonight, but we lament the missed opportunities to increase the rights for the more than 1 million tenants in New Zealand, including those in non-traditional housing environments, and tonight want to raise the issue of those in cold, damp, unhealthy homes. We support many of the minor changes in this bill to clarify existing law and to broaden it out to reflect the significant changes that have occurred since it was first introduced in this House in 1986. Since 1986, the proportion of New Zealanders renting their homes has gone up. Fewer young people are flatting away from home, and more older people with children and families are choosing to rent. Tonight, while we discuss the law around tenancies, I'd like to discuss where they're living. By first world standards, the standard of our housing stock is appalling. According to a recent study commissioned by the Business Council for Sustainable Development, New Zealand has around 1 million inadequately insulated homes. Too many of our homes are cold, damp, and it's no wonder we have disproportionately higher rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases. While we're talking books tonight, I'd like to book drop Philippa Howden Chapman's new book, Do Damp and Mould Matter?, which documents the extreme health impacts of our poor housing. On top of health issues, our inefficient housing leads to excessive power consumption, higher than necessary heating bills for many households, a huge amount who are in energy poverty, and plays a part in New Zealand's increasing greenhouse gas emissions. We've got around 450,000 rental properties housing a third of our population, and generally these are the coldest and least efficient of our nation's housing stock. Lower socioeconomic groups and young people are disproportionately affected by substandard rental properties. Many young people have no choice but to pay exorbitant rents in exchange for housing that's cold, damp, and inefficient and expensive to heat. The Green Party has achieved a lot with this government and the previous Labour government, and the current scheme aims to retrofit 188,000 Kiwis' homes with ceiling and underfloor insulation and provide them with access to clean heating devices over 4 years. However, when you look at the rental market, the uptake has only been around 10% of this scheme for rental properties. At this rate, it's going to take decades to bring all of our rental properties up to an acceptable, to a healthy level. So tonight, while we think about tenancy law, let's also think holistically about where our people are being tenants. Looking at this bill, the Green Party believes it's important that we strike the right balance between the rights of landlords and the rights of tenants. In my second reading speech, I looked at a few of the issues the Greens had with this bill, such as the termination issue for tenancy of boarding house tenants, the security of tenure issue for boarding house residents that we had concerns in earlier stages were improved somewhat in the Select Committee, but not to the extent we would have liked. Another issue was the charging of letting fees, where the Green Party would have supported a prohibition on charging of letting fees to tenants at all. We lament the unfortunate oversight about not addressing the termination of a residential tenancy following the death of a tenant. Looking at legal representation issues, this continues the currently unfair provision that permit a corporate landlord to otherwise be represented by an experienced tenancy manager, while the tenant, often who knows little about tenancy law and may well have English as a second language, is forced to represent him or herself. Boarding house residents have been waiting a long time for this bill to extend their rights and current protections, but there's another sector in New Zealand who's currently unprotected. There's those who we could have been extending protection to, who reside in non-traditional housing forms such as caravan parks and backpackers. Everyone in New Zealand deserves a fair go, but this bill failed to address the fact of life that in New Zealand in 2010, many thousands of Kiwis are not formal tenants, they don't live in boarding houses, and they suffer for want of normal tenancy rights. It's a good example where the updating of this old 1980s Act was good and needed, but didn't go far enough to reflect the real facts on the ground. Lastly, it was a pity that the supplementary order paper put up by the Labour member Moana Maki around the major events didn't pass. This is a major concern with one of the world's biggest sporting events coming to our shores next year, the Rugby World Cup. We're going to see people in boarding houses, people in flats, kicked out of their homes so landlords can make a quick buck. In summary, Mr Speaker, the main criticisms of this bill at the introduction were over issues which it didn't adequately address. Following the Select Committee changes, some positive and some negative changes were made, but from our point of view and on balance, the Green Party still supports voting for this bill. Kia ora.
Call Honi Harawira.